What's up, Clever Masterminds? Cleverboy86 here. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Walking Dead Season 9, Episode 4, which is titled The Obliged. This review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen it, definitely go watch it before you watch this review. So I thought this was another great episode. I've really been enjoying Season 9 so far. These first 4 episodes have been amazing, and episode 5 looks like it's going to be one of the best episodes of the entire series. Obviously, we know that next week's episode is Rick Grimes' last episode, and some people are saying that he's going to die. Some people are saying he's going to leave in the helicopter. Personally, I think he's going to die, and I want to make a whole separate video about this. But the reason why I think he's going to die is because if you watch the promo for episode 5, you'll see that Rick is having all these hallucinations. And all of his hallucinations are basically scenes from the pilot that have been recreated. And we know that Shane's going to be coming back in episode 5. So I think he's having all of these hallucinations because he's about to die. And we'll see his death play out in the next episode. And I think the helicopter will end up taking Maggie instead, and we'll see Maggie return in season 10. But I definitely think Rick is going to die because he's having all these hallucinations. I think next week's episode is going to be a lot like Tyrese's last episode, which was the season 5 mid-season premiere. Basically, Tyrese got bit, and before he died, he was having all these hallucinations. So I think we're going to see something similar to that in next week's episode, and we'll see Rick's death play out in episode 5. So that's my prediction. I don't think he'll be leaving in the helicopter. Plus, I think if he dies, that just gives us closure. And anyways, that's my prediction. I do believe Rick is going to die in next week's episode. But yeah. Anyways, let's get into my review for episode 4. So basically, at the start of this episode, we see Michonne basically running Alexandria, and we're starting to see her become the leader of Alexandria. And we get this little montage. Basically, during the day, she's picking tomatoes with Judith and helping the people of Alexandria. And then at night, she goes outside the walls, and we see her killing walkers. And one night, she's out killing walkers, and she finds a walker hanging from a noose underneath a tree. And then a walker attacks Michonne from behind, and she drops her katana and picks up a weapon off the ground. And she realizes that she's holding a baseball bat. And she's reminded of Negan's bat, Lucille, and she just drops the bat on the ground. And then we see Maggie at the hilltop, and she sneaks a crowbar into her backpack, and she's going to Alexandria to kill Negan. And Jesus suspects that she's going someplace other than the camp. And Maggie tells him that she's going to make things right. And Jesus advises her to consider her decision, but Maggie sticks with her decision and leaves the hilltop with Diane. And then back at the camp, Jerry finds Rick and conveys a message from Jesus that Maggie's headed for Alexandria. And Rick contacts Alexandria and says to delay Maggie at the gate and alert Michonne right away. And Rick prepares to leave for Alexandria on horseback, but Daryl takes Rick on his motorcycle instead. And back at Alexandria, one of the Alexandrians informs Michonne that Negan is refusing to eat. And we get some pretty cool stuff with Michonne and Negan. Personally, that was my favorite part of the episode. But anyways, meanwhile, Daryl and Rick are riding to Alexandria. And Daryl intentionally misses the turn to Alexandria. And Rick orders him to pull over. And Daryl tells him that this time it's going to go the way it was supposed to. But Rick tells Daryl that he already called it in, and Maggie's not going to make it through the gates. But Daryl tells him that the message didn't go through, revealing that he messed with the relay. And then Daryl pushes Rick, and they both tumble into a pit. And I kind of thought we would get like more of a fight between Rick and Daryl. Really, Daryl just pushed Rick around a couple of times, and that was about it. So I kind of thought we'd be getting like more of a fight, but anyways, meanwhile at Alexandria, Michonne brings some food to Negan's cell and orders him to eat. And Negan wants her to stay and talk to him, and Michonne agrees to talk for 20 minutes. And meanwhile, Rick tries to climb out of the pit, and him and Daryl are arguing about the merits of keeping Negan alive. And Daryl reminds Rick that Glenn is the reason that Rick found Lori and Carl and everyone else. And I thought this was a really great scene because we actually got some really great dialogue between Rick and Daryl. And I actually wrote down a quote that Rick said to Daryl. Rick basically said, "If this doesn't work, if she kills Negan, he becomes a martyr. The war was for nothing. Every person who died for nothing. Carl died for nothing." And the way Andrew Lincoln delivered that line, like he was starting to break down as he was saying it, I thought that was a really great line. And Daryl tells Rick that he has to let Carl go. And I think Daryl definitely has a point there. You know, it is sad that Carl's dead, but, you know, just because Carl was Rick's son doesn't mean he was right about everything. And a lot of what Rick's doing is to honor Carl's memory. So I think Daryl definitely has a point that Rick needs to let Carl go a little bit. And then we get some stuff with Michonne and Negan. Negan tells Michonne that he's grateful that his wife didn't have to see him like this. And Michonne kind of opens up about her first son, Andre. And I thought that was really interesting because we haven't heard Michonne talk about Andre since season 4 when she told Carl about him. So I thought that was a really interesting scene. But Negan says that Michonne's son and his wife weren't made for this world. And he tells her that Andre would have made her weak. And Michonne kind of snaps and just storms out. Meanwhile, we find out what's going on with Father Gabriel. And we know in episode 3 he was at the junkyard and Anne knocked him out. So we see that Gabriel is tied up at the junkyard. And we see that Anne is about to kill him using an armless walker that's tied to a dolly. And she lowers the walker towards Gabriel's face, but Gabriel is able to talk her out of it. And Anne ends up sparing him. Meanwhile, at the camp, we see sort of a showdown between Carol and a few other survivors and Jed with a gang of saviors. And Jed has figured out that Oceanside has been killing the saviors. And he tells Carol that they'll get what's coming to them. And Carol tells him to stop. And we hear a gunshot go off. And we don't actually know what happened. I think we'll find out in next week's episode. But Rick and Daryl hear gunshots coming from the camp. And meanwhile at Alexandria, Michonne brings another sandwich to Negan. And she asks why he said those things. And Negan says that they're the same. And Michonne tells him that they're not. And then he asks Michonne where Lucille is. And Michonne tells him that they don't have Lucille and that she's out there somewhere. And then Negan repeatedly bangs his head against the wall. And then meanwhile, Rick and Daryl escape from the pit. And we see walkers falling into the pit, which I thought that was pretty cool. But Rick is able to get out first. And he holds his hand out to Daryl. And he's like, "Brother, take my hand." And he helps Daryl out of the pit. So I thought that was a really great scene. And so they get out of the pit. And a herd of walkers is coming. And Daryl urges Rick to lead the herd to the bridge which would collapse from the weight and send the walkers into the river. But Rick refuses to sacrifice the bridge. So basically, Daryl gets on his motorcycle and sets off to help the camp. And Rick leads the herd down the road where he encounters a second herd. And I thought the scene was really cool because it mirrored the end of the pilot episode when Rick rides into Atlanta and he gets thrown off his horse and he's surrounded by walkers and he ends up crawling under the tank. So I thought the scene was cool because it mirrored the end of the pilot episode. Anyway, so the horse that Rick's riding on throws Rick off and Rick is impaled on a piece of rebar and he begins to lose consciousness and we see that he's surrounded by walkers on all sides. And the episode ends as Rick begins to lose consciousness. So, yeah, this episode definitely left off on a cliffhanger. And, yeah, so, anyways, I thought this was a really great episode. And out of the first 4 episodes of Season 9, I'd have to say this episode is my favorite. We got some great stuff with Rick and Daryl. We got some great stuff with Michonne and Negan. And it was just a really great episode overall. And, yeah, so the end of this episode was absolutely insane. Episode 5 is going to be an amazing episode. Obviously, it's Rick's final episode. And I'm really excited to see it, but at the same time, I don't know if I'm ready. So, yeah, it's going to be a great episode. But anyways, I'm going to give this episode a 9 out of 10. The only part of the episode I didn't really like was the stuff with Anne and Father Gabriel. I just thought it was kind of like the same old stuff with Jadis that we saw in Season 8. And, I don't know, it just kind of reminded me of Jadis and just how much I hated her character. I mean, I'm fine with her character now, but I just hated her in Season 7 and 8. And, yeah, so that was the only part of the episode I didn't like. But overall, I thought this was a really great episode, and, yeah, so, anyways, that's it for this review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Stay tuned for my review of The Walking Dead Season 9, Episode 5, which is titled What Comes After. It's going to be a pretty heavy episode, but I'm looking forward to it, so stay tuned for my review of Episode 5. I'll be coming next week. But yeah, anyways, that's it for this review. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you all for the next one. Alright, bye guys.